It's time for this week's episode of Brandon Sports Talk, featuring in-depth interviews from those who are trending in the world of athletics. And now, here's the host of Brandon Sports Talk, Brandon Pate.
Welcome back to Brandon Sports Talk. In today's episode, I have the privilege to interview Luke Nortoon, Man in the Hat podcast. How are you doing today?
Good. How are you doing, Brandon?
I'm doing good. Can you talk about how you knew that you wanted to start a sports talk podcast?
Yeah. So, sports has always been something that's been near and dear to me. Growing up around sports, playing sports in high school, and I got my bachelor's degree in sports management. So I've always kind of had a love for sports, but it wasn't really until this year where I thought podcasts are becoming more and more popular, and I'm seeing my other friends, they're doing sports podcasts. And I'm like, you know what, I could make an interesting sports talk about sports. And, with the title being Men in the Hat Sports Podcast, I'm an avid hat collector. For those that know me, they know I've got over 100 hats. It's not even close. So, why not add two loves together, sports and hats? And, I couldn't come up with the easier title than that because it just came to me.
What were some of the titles that you were coming across besides Man in a Hat?
To be honest, I don't think I ever came up with any second or third title where I thought it had been like, oh, this could be a good one. This could be a good one. Because I was thinking to myself, like, okay, when I'm doing a podcast here, like, if I just talk about sports, people may get bored about it. So I'm like, let's add something that I love too. Like, obviously I love sports, but if I add something a little bit more personal, then people will be like, hey, this is kind of cool. Like, I don't think there's any other podcast out there that does that. I don't think at all. So, you got to be unique, you got to stand out somehow. So, this title came to my mind simultaneously as I was coming up with the idea. I'm like, Man in the Hat Sports Podcast? Yeah, we're going to go with that. But didn't even lose sleep over. I'm like, all right, let's get logos branded. Let's get some music and, let's get it rolling.
What are some segments
so that's kind of how I came up with that.
What are some segments that you have?
So my main segment. So my main segment is obviously it's just general sports content. I talk about sports news from the week to week, kind of looking at stories on social media, the internet. So there's kind of, sports is a never ending subject, really. As long as there's content out there, I've got something to talk about. I'm a big hockey fan, but I talk about sports from most of the leagues like the NFL, the NBA, and the NHL. The other sports I kind of don't know. I don't really talk about them as much because I feel like people want to hear more about professional sports inside of that. And then obviously I have a hat of the day, which is where I cover my hat and kind of talk about the history behind the hat and description on it. So, that's a pretty good one. And then I just added one a couple weeks ago. It's a little bit of a cringy title. I'm just forewarning you. It's called Dope Stuff, where I cover kind of cool equipment and jerseys I come across. Like last week, I covered a lacrosse helmet from the University of Oregon. I covered some jerseys. There's this PSG soccer jersey. It's like a hyper pink jersey. So it's like, I come across these cool things, be like, you know what? These things are kind of cool. Maybe people would like to hear about it, so it's kind of a segment that I came up with over time. Obviously it's not as frequent as, the sports information because there's only like certain pages that drop news on, certain jersey drops and equipment and things like that. So I kind of have to browse a little bit to find things that I can talk about.
When it comes to your hat collection, over time, did you add on to it by sponsorships and stuff like that?
Like if I go through anybody, like they sponsor me and give me hats kind of a thing, or
yes,
is that kind of what you're talking about? Yeah, no, unfortunately, like I don't have anything. But my goal of mine, I don't like to buy hats full price, and I think that's a really good mindset to have. Like when I was first collecting hats, sure, I'd buy a brand new hat, which is fine. And then other times, hats are too expensive. They're like $35-$40 a piece. So I go on like, selling websites like Macari or OfferUp, eBay, things like that from time to time, and find a hat maybe under $20 that I think looks cool. So, I mean, I honestly couldn't even tell you. I probably spent over a couple $1,000s in my hat collection at least. But I mean, as expensive as they are, like, I don't know, it's just something I can't stop. If you want to call it an addiction, sure. But I mean, I think it's kind of neat. Obviously with any hobby, you have to put money into it. Obviously I don't wear every single hat, but just having a collection there is something that I like to do in my spare time, obviously.
What are some of the topics that you have come up with?
Let's see here. So 2 weeks ago, I had an interview with one of my buddies I went to college with, and he runs a sports podcast page too. We talked about the Carson Wentz and the trade with the Colts, that situation. We talked about kind of the NBA All-Star game and kind of, thinking why they were having it and whatnot, and just, curious as what the whole point was. We're still kind of recovering from a pandemic, and you see all these other sports not doing one, to be like, there's going to be very minimal impact from fans in that game. It's like, why, waste the time to do it? Obviously, the NBA All-Star game was awesome this year. Everybody's putting on a show. Steph Curry, Dame Lillard, shooting threes from crazy distances. And, that's always fun to watch. But at the same time, too, I feel like, there's got to be some perspective in mind when you're doing things. But no, we also talked about the NBA, statement jerseys that they come out with and which ones we liked and didn't like. So I've talked about hockey games and endings and things like that. So it's kind of endless for me, I would say. Like I said before, if there's a story out there, I'm going to cover it. Like in this week's episode, I'm going to talk about Dak Prescott's huge ass contract. Oh my gosh, thing's ginormous. I think honestly, I think that's too much money for him. Not that he doesn't deserve it, but I think, you look at other top paid quarterbacks like Russell Wilson or Patrick Mahomes, like they've won Super Bowls, MVPs like that. Like Dak Prescott really hasn't won anything. So, I mean, I'll cover that in this weekend's episode. And also I'll talk about Blake Griffin going to the Nets too. So there's a lot of sports, content that I can come across.
When you cover, of course, your segment of talking about jerseys and stuff, how do you come up with where you find the jerseys at?
I mostly look on Instagram. I think there's a page I follow. It's called Uniswag. They'll show kind of some cool stuff like college jerseys, pro jerseys from time to time. Other pages like The Score, which is like a sports news page, they'll drop some cool stuff from time to time. And then obviously you have the team that'll drop it themselves on social media, like PSG dropping their jersey. They put on their Instagram. But no, I only really look through Instagram, I think, because everybody has access to it, that it's such an easy outlet for me to look during the week and say, hey, this is what I want to talk about. But I could probably look around the internet for sure. But I think, with the touch of a button, I'm on Instagram and I scroll and come across something that's cool, then I'll cover it.
What are some of your future plans with your podcast, Man in the Hat?
Honestly, I've been thinking about it. I've been talking to one of my buddies. My goal, obviously, I got to get some better recording equipment. Right now, I just use my phone. So, when I get to Arizona, I'm going to use I think they call it a snowball microphone. It's like the round ones that's got a little tripod on it to help, improve audio quality. My fiance just got me a Mac desktop, so I'm going to use like GarageBand and record on there and edit it. Because big thing for me is like learning how to edit, like looking around the internet and stuff. Like obviously I think I should be editing more, but like I try to use like Audacity. I think it's kind of complicated, to do that, but watching YouTube videos on GarageBand, I'm like, I could give this a shot, because obviously you want to make the audio sound good. So I think at times that might hinder my podcast in the sense of, with stuttering and stuff or whatever, but I do multiple takes in an episode, probably maybe 2 or 3 before it's like actually what I want to send out, because, you need time to practice what you're going to say and things like that. And, for me, the biggest thing now is what I've been experimenting with is social media. I have a podcast page, The Myth Podcast, where, I'm trying to figure out the best way to, give out content. And the coolest thing I came across a couple of weeks ago, actually, it's called thewave.com. I think it's either 2 V's or 2 A's. I think it's 2 V's, but so you can record audio and they can make it into like, when you see audio wavelength, like when you're talking, it'll go up and down, like it'll follow your voice. So I can post it where I can post a snippet from my episode and it'll cover maybe 30, 40 seconds, but you'll see the wave bars going up and down with my voice. So it kind of, it follows my voice, which I think is a really neat idea. It's $10 a month and I can have up to like 10 minutes, which is really cool because, I want people to hear what I have to say, regardless if they choose to listen to the episode or not. I have an access to have people hear what I'm saying without even having to go to my episode. Like, hey, check out this snippet. I talked about JJ Watt going to the Cardinals, and that's kind of what I put on my Instagram, a sneak peek of this week's episode. I talk about JJ Watt or whatever, and I always say, post it from my Spotify or whatever, say, new episodes out, so I think that's probably been a struggle for me too, is, trying to figure out to get the most viewers, because I've got 10 episodes right now and I'm probably only averaging about 10 audience members an episode, which is fine. But actually this weekend's episode is going to be cool because I'm doing a giveaway for Amazon. So I put it on my Instagram, like, hey, you want to win a $25 gift card to Amazon? Find out how in this week's episode. So they're going to have to watch the episode to see how they can win it. But what I'm going to do a listener survey so I can get people's input and, see how I can really make the show better, what's working, what's not. Because I tried last week trying to just ask for general input, and I realized that's not really good enough if you're trying to get anywhere. And, doing some research, I'm like, that was probably not a great idea because people tell me they like it, which is awesome. But if I'm not specific enough, they're not going to give me points to be like, hey, this is what you should work on. Because, obviously as a podcaster, you want to get better. And, I have 10 episodes already. I'm like, I feel like I should have more viewers, but I'll talk about, sometimes I don't care because I love talking about sports, but at the same time too, you're putting this work into and you'll be like, I should be getting the viewers back, so that's, it's been kind of this whole thing going on, but I love what I'm doing. So that's really the only thing that matters to me.
That's pretty amazing. What advice would you give upcoming future sports talk podcasts looking to get started?
Honestly, my biggest advice would be go for it. If sports is something you like, or any podcast really doesn't have to be sports. If there's something you're passionate about and, and if you're comfortable talking behind a camera or a microphone, but like, I'll be honest, like I don't like hearing my own voice, but I've gotten so used to it now because I record so much, even though it's like 10, 15 minutes, but you continuously hear your voice. So you're not like, you're not afraid by it. Cause everybody like me, I'm not a big fan of public speaking, but I can sit behind a microphone and talk if I have enough chance to, and, enough tries, I'll get comfortable hearing my voice and editing that stuff. And I would say go for it. But obviously, I think you have to think about it too, where if you're going to have enough, input to talk about and topics and things like that. And my thing is also think about your mode of recording. I started on my computer, and I'll be honest, my first maybe three episodes, it sounded like my audio sounded like garbage. which is funny because you would think it would sound better than a phone, but my phone sounds way better than my computer does, which is, it makes me laugh, but it's true. So I'm like, man, why did I not ever use my phone to start with? But now, I exclusively use my phone until, I get my recording stuff, which will help me edit things or whatever. And, I didn't always have a logo. I kind of had just like a background with the text. My sister's actually a graphic designer. She lives in Alabama, but I was like talking to her, like, hey, would you want to create a logo for me? She's like, I'd love to. So she made my logo for me. It looks really awesome. And then one of my buddies back home, he created the music for me, kind of that introduction, like a sports show, something like that, what it sounds like. So, there's a lot of people I'm thankful for to help me get where I am, because maybe I'm maybe thinking the first 3-4 episodes, maybe I didn't have any of that stuff. So like, if I just have straight talking and none of those other things involved, then I would imagine that's a turnoff for people, because I can look on Anchor and see how many people view my episodes. Like my first episode is by far the best episode, which is funny because audio wise, it is absolutely garbage. And maybe it's because people will try it out or they don't listen to the whole thing, which I think I'll find out more this weekend. But, it's just funny. Like if I could average 20 an episode, like I'd be happy with that to start off with. Like, so it's funny to see how many people stay or go or don't listen to it. But, the other thing I would say too, like obviously you're going to be frustrated. And that's understandable. Like for me, you want more viewers and, that's what everybody wants, but it takes time. Like I'm only probably a little over 2 months into it. And I have like 107 plays with 10 episodes. And so you got to start somewhere. You got to stay consistent. You want to make sure you're posting at the same time. You say, if you do it every week, like me, I'm posting every Saturday. So I got to make sure I'm on that. So consistency is key. And your passion. If your passion's not there for a podcast, I wouldn't suggest you do it, because I feel like people are going to be able to tell if you're passionate or not. So, sum it up, I think you got to be passionate about a topic. You got to put the work in. It's okay to be frustrated. Results take time with anything. Like I've learned so much already with doing a podcast, like, what equipment to use or access to. So I think it's really important you keep those things in mind when you're trying to figure out if you're going to do a podcast or not.
That's amazing advice. Where can my listeners find your podcast, Man in the Hat, on social media and podcast platforms?
So my biggest ones are on my podcast. So I'm on Apple Podcasts and Spotify under Man in the Hat Sports Podcast. And if you want to check out my Instagram page, it's Myth Podcast. That's MITH podcast. Obviously, like I said before, it's a work in progress, trying to play with some things and trying to figure out what's going to be best for me to post for what people are going to listen to and watch. It's funny, I tried TikTok. That didn't really work out for me. I don't know what it is about it, but I think I'd rather start by doing just audio only for now until I can get, regular views over maybe like 10 to 20 before I start going back to video, because, if I'm building a podcast is mainly voice audio, obviously. So I want to build that before I build the, visual side. Like when I get big enough, hopefully, I'd like to do maybe live shows like some people do on YouTube, have the background, like have my hats in the background, things like that. But, the big thing is it's going to take time, but, I always appreciate the listens for those who join the show. So, a brief snippet, a kind of a reason why I did it is because, people, I feel like for me, at least, you're sick and tired of listening to a sports show for an hour before you really feel like, where's the good stuff? And so I'm like, why not I condense it to 15 minutes and give people kind of an expedited news around sports? Like, because not every sports news in the professional leagues is newsworthy, in my opinion. I think some contract stuff don't really aren't really that important to talk about or things like that. But, the big stuff, I'm going to cover that. Like, the JJ Watt, what else did I talk about? I'm going to talk about Dak Prescott's deal and Blake Griffin. So like sports news like that, where it's actually impactful for people, I'm going to give, an expedited version as much as I can and kind of, give some stats and some personal opinions on that. But, I always appreciate the listens, and, you can always find me on Spotify and Apple Podcasts at Man in the Hat Sports Podcast, and on Instagram at The Myth Podcast. That's MITH Podcast.
Thank you again, Luke, for your interview, and best of luck with the Man in the Hat podcast.
Thanks, Brandon. Have a great night.
You too. You can find Brandon Sports Talk on Facebook at Brandon Sports Talk, Instagram at Brandon Sports Talk, Twitter at Talk_Brandon, and you can find me on YouTube at Brandon Sports Talk. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you again, Luke, for your interview, and best of luck.
You've been watching Brandon Sports Talk. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to Brandon Sports Talk on social media and on YouTube.